Thank you. Chris just saved us. We had no connection to Zoom. So welcome, Zoomers. Welcome, everybody. We're really privileged today to have our former interim rabbi and rabbi for many years in other places, Rabbi Wylen, speak to us about the Tzaddik, the Hasidic concept of the ideal leader. He's spoken to us before, and he was just talking about his book that's recently been published. And it's called You Should Know This.
A rabbi explains Christianity to Jews.
Right. So thank you for joining us. To the intrepid people who braved the storm, we're so delighted to have you here. And to our visitors on Zoom, we're happy to have you as well. So without further ado, I will
Thank you. Thank you. By the way, you don't have to buy my book, but I know who you are.
And it's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon, right? The ebook is only $8, but apparently you get Amazon discounts. I don't know how that works, but if I buy it, it's like $3.50 because I have like Amazon points.
At the synagogue, book acquiring its library, which I don't know if it's a good thing to share because it's a proper reflection of respect to Rabbi Wylen, or if it's a way you find out you can read the book without having to buy a copy.
Thank you. Well, the synagogue doesn't have to buy a copy. I will donate a copy. Well, I mean, they made me a member here. It's the least I can do, I think. Yeah, I'll donate a copy. So remind me of that. Since I couldn't even remember to bring one to sell, I hope, but I'll remember to bring one hopefully at some point to donate. So hello, everybody. Our topic today is the Tzaddik, the Hasidic leader, the ideal Hasidic leader. And someone said to me, oh, Tzaddik, righteous people. We're going to be learning about righteous people. And I could say to myself, boy, are you in for a surprise, whoever said that to me. The word Tzaddik means a righteous person, but in the context of Hasidism, it has nothing to do with that. And you will see that, but rather than I explain it from the beginning, let's take a look at a Hasidic concept of the Tzaddik, of the Hasidic leader. And then when we know what we're talking about, then we'll say why it doesn't mean a righteous person. All right, so the first mention of the Tzaddik, the ideal Hasidic leader, in written Hasidic material comes from a book called the Degel Machane Ephraim, which was written by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Ephraim, who was a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. So therefore, he is in the third generation of Hasidic leadership, right? But in a sense, really, the third generation is the first. The first generation is just the Baal Shem Tov and his immediate circle of followers. There actually were not many of them, and it was very localized in their obscure section of the Ukraine. Not that many people knew about the Baal Shem Tov in his lifetime, surprising us since he's so famous. Then, after his death in 1760, just before America was founded, so that's a good, to keep the dates in mind, the movement was taken over by his closest disciples, and the two closest were Rabbi Jacob Joseph, who wrote the first book of Hasidism called In Praise of the Baal Shem Tov, and you can buy it in English translation. And the other one who never wrote anything is the Maggid of Mezrich, who created the Hasidic movement after the death of the master. It's quite parallel, by the way, to the way Paul created Christianity after the death of Jesus. And in fact, that parallel has even been used by historical writers on Christianity. How do we know what happened then? Well, we can take it from the 1800 years later example of Hasidism. So the Maggid of Mezrich started a school of Hasidism, as it were. And he gathered around the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov and a bunch of young, promising people, trained them in Hasidism, and sent them out into the world to found Hasidic groups in all the towns and cities, mostly towns, not so much cities, of the Western Ukraine, which is called, Jewish people, what's the Galicia, the Galicianers, right? Galicia, the Western Ukraine, which then was Southern Poland, is Galicia. What are the two types of East European Jews? Galicianers and Litvaks. or as my favorite joke that I made up myself, it's my favorite made up joke, and you'll only get this if you understand the difference, is that because I'm half Galicianer, I get drunk every day. But because I'm half Litvak, I don't enjoy it. So the Galicianers are the ones who became the Hasidim. The Litvaks, who were more interested in Talmud study, it was not ripe country for them, for a charismatic movement which valued prayer above study. So it spread throughout Galicia. From the disciples of the Maggid. It's really the Maggid who created Hasidism. And one of the disciples of the Maggid, the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, was the first one to write about these new Jewish leaders who were spreading out through Galicia, who they called the Tzaddik. And let's take a look at what he has to say about it. Rabbi Moshe Chaim Ephraim wrote a commentary to the Torah. And in his commentary, he is on the Torah portion, Naso, from the book of Numbers, which begins with the word, Naso means lift up. When I distributed, whoever doesn't have a copy of the text, come get one. Pass it down, please. All right. So the first phrase of that Torah portion is, when you lift up the heads of the Israelite people. Lifting up the heads meaning counting heads, okay? It's the commandment to take a census of the Israelites. But Rabbi Moshe Chaim Ephraim gives it a completely different meaning by taking it literally, lifting up the head of the people, who's now not a physical head, but the leader. The leader is the head of the people. So he takes this phrase, when you lift up the head, to bring up the idea of the new Hasidic leader who shall be lifted up above the membership of the community. And this is what he has to say, the commentary. One may interpret this verse according to what I learned from a wise person of his generation, none other than Rabbi Jacob Joseph, the Maggid of Polonia. As I mentioned, Jacob Joseph was the other chief disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, along with the Maggid of Mezrich. So he explained lift up the head with the parable. When a person exhausts his brain, his mental capacity, not sleeping as much as he needs, the result is that every limb of the body becomes heavy, and he is unable to use his limbs to perform their labor, and he is unable to converse intelligibly, right? You all know this. When you're tired, your body doesn't work very well. Your hands don't work very well. Your legs don't work very well. Your digestion doesn't work very well. The brain has to be well rested. You need a good night's sleep. On the other hand, when the mind is clear, rested, and strong, then every one of the limbs of a human being becomes strong and able. Everything else works when the head works. It's all dependent on the brain. This requires no proof, since it is known from experience to every person. The matter of the tzaddikim is according to this parable. And here he is using in writing for the first time the word tzaddik in the Hasidic sense of a leader of a community. One of those people who was sent out by the Maggid to establish a group of Hasidic followers in each small town in Galicia and be the leader of that group. The tzaddikim are the head of the generation, and the people are the limbs of the tzaddik. Okay, so now the Hasidic people the leaders sent out by the Baal Shem Tov, by the Maggid, established these Hasidic communities in all these towns, and maybe there's a few hundred Hasidim, and then they grow, there's a few thousand. The movement grew to the extent that in a single generation, more than half the Jews of Eastern Europe were Hasidim. Pretty remarkable. That's how quickly it grew. And they joined these communities under the leadership of the leader, who is now, for the first time here, given the title of Tzaddik. Now, you know that they didn't address their leader as Tzaddik. How did they address their leader? Rabbi. And one thing that a lot of people who speak English don't quite get is that Rebbe is not rabbi. It is not rabbi. Just like people often misunderstand Reb when you see it written on a gravestone, Reb, it just means Mr. Okay, it's just a general, pardon me, Reb Tevye, right? It doesn't mean this, right? It's just Mr., right? It's just a little mark of respect. Rebbe is not rabbi. What is Rebbe? He's a charismatic leader. He's not, you're a rabbi because you know the Talmud better than anybody else, and you know how to derive law from the Talmud better than anybody else, and you can argue the logic of the Talmud better than everybody else. Most of the Rebbes didn't know much Talmud. They knew some because, they were Jews in Eastern Europe. You learned some Talmud. They were not Talmud scholars. They were charismatic leaders. So they're not Rebbe, they're not rabbi, they're Rebbe. Completely different title, which never existed before. Rebbe was a made-up word for a new type of leader within Judaism. But formally, the Rebbe is the Tzaddik of the community. And as Rabbi Moshe Chaim says here, he is the head. All the other members of the community are the other body parts. The people are the limbs of the tzaddik. Now, when the head is clear, that is when the tzaddik has all the free time he needs and he is freed from all earthly necessity and hard labor. In other words, he doesn't need a job. Then the tzaddik is able to lift up all of his limbs, the masses of the people. And you notice it's not just used the way you use your hands, you use your legs. Lift them up, lift up your hands, lift up your legs, because he's lifting them up, not just in a physical sense of the community, but he's lifting them up towards heaven. He's lifting them up to a unity with God. But he's the head, they're the limbs. The tzaddik fills them with energy and passion to serve their creator. They themselves are lifted up to God. So you can pick up your hand, but only if your brain says pick up the hand, right? The brain is the one making all the decisions. So the tzaddik makes all the decisions for the members of the community. And they do what he says, but as a result, the community is functioning as an organic whole, as a single body, and everyone is lifted up.
Except because the tzaddik has the time to do all to study and has more knowledge of the Torah.
It's not knowledge of the Torah.
Not.
It's not. Otherwise, he'd be a rabbi. He has a spiritual quality. He has a spiritual quality, which makes him inherently holy, closer to God.
Spirit.
He has a spiritual quality.
And how does he convey that to people, to the branches? How is that?
Okay, how do you know that the tzaddik is really a tzaddik, right?
Yes.
Could you hold that question for a little bit? Because that's not much of an issue this generation. The people sent out by the Maggid, they established the dynasties. They're the tzaddik. They were sent out by the Maggid. They had his blessing. They were trained by him. Where that becomes an issue is when the Rebbes die and someone gets to take over. It's quite a nice sinecure. Sinecure. Right? Because as Moshe Chaim Ephraim has just established, the head can't function if it's not at rest, if it's not at ease. What he's arguing for here is not only the leadership position of the Rebbe, but the need of the people to support him financially. Right? That's what he means when he says, when the head is clear, which is when the tzaddik has all the free time he needs and does not have to work. Right?
So are they determined on your genetic line? Do people sort of protect? Were they protecting this genetic line where making the sons of and the grandsons of?
That's what happened. Shockingly, it became a heritage. Which is unheard of in historic Judaism. Okay, There is no head of a Talmudic academy, a Gaon, who became Gaon because his father was Gaon. Okay, there is no rabbi, Rav of a community who became Rav because his father was Rav. These positions were always appointed by the elders of the community according to the most qualified scholar. But now when it becomes a source of wealth, a monarchy, you have, for the first time in Jewish history, a hereditary leadership in the Hasidic world, right? So remember, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the last Lubavitcher Rebbe was the 10th Lubavitcher Rebbe. His predecessor did not have sons, but he was the grandson of one Lubavitcher Rebbe and the son-in-law of another one. So he was twice descended from the earlier Rebbes. Now, why are there two different Vishnitzer communities right now? Because there's two different sons and they each wanted to take over. So they each started their own and they grappled for followers. Right now, as we speak, there are two different Vishnitzer groups. I believe there's two different Satmar groups. Right, the brothers, because look, it's worth millions. It's worth millions. And you got all those followers, so they're fighting over them. It's very unsavory.
Was not with Rabbi Yosef. The Rosh Yeshiva is Rosh Yeshiva builder. But you're saying Reb doesn't mean rabbi. He was a rabbi.
He was a rabbi, but you didn't address people as Rav. I mean, they were a Rav. And if he was Rosh Yeshiva, he was a Rav, which means rabbi. But they addressed him Reb as a mark of respect because he was a leader of the community.
Was he a Rebbe or a Reb?
No, if he was a Rosh Yeshiva, he was a Rav. It's not a Reb, by the way, it's Rav. Rav is rabbi. The word we translate into English as R-A-B-B-I
But you said they addressed him as a Rebbe.
is Rav. So Rav is a Talmud scholar, okay? And a Rebbe is a Hasidic leader, okay? Interestingly, the Yiddish press, like the Forvitz, in the old days when most American Jews spoke Yiddish, they had three different words. They had Rav, Resh Bet, for a traditional rabbi. They had Rebbe, Resh Bet Yud, for a Hasidic leader. And they had Rabbi, Resh Aleph Bet Aleph Yud, for one of those reform people. They were a rabbi. They were not a Rav, okay? And we're not, it's different, right? We're not ordained on the basis of how many pages of Talmud we've learned, on a different basis. But the Rebbe is his position in the community is Tzaddik. You don't say the community is led by a Rebbe. Rebbe is what they call our Rebbe, but he's the Tzaddik. So let's finish the commentary, then I'll make a few more comments. And by the way, the plan for today is just like we're doing. I'm talking and presenting, but you're supposed to interrupt anytime you want with any thought you have, and we can discuss it. So the Tzaddik fills the people with energy and passion to serve their creator. They themselves are lifted up to God, which they couldn't do without the Rebbe. They could not do it on their own. This is the message of the phrase, when you lift up the head of the people, that when your desire is to uplift the Jewish people as a whole, you begin with the brain, the head, which is the tzaddikim and the wise who are the leaders of the generation. Give them rest and leisure, in other words, fund them to perform their task. And then the rest of the body, the whole Jewish people, will follow. They will be filled with life, passion, desire, and will to serve their creator because of the Rebbe, without which they would not be. You should understand this, which in Hebrew is one word, haven. You should get this. That's my title of my book, right? You should understand this. This you should know, right? So that's the comment.
Like Catholicism.
Sounds like
Catholicism, you need someone to be your leader. The priest is going to take you up in the situation. And he'll be able to lift them up, let them live for free, and then be your spiritual link to God. A little different. You do the spirit, but Catholicism.
you're right, but I'm going to argue with it a little bit. It sounds more like evangelical Christianity.
Okay.
Right, where because the Catholic priest is not only not primarily, not at all a charismatic leader. the Catholic priest is authorized by the church to dispense the sacraments of the church. You're not even supposed to listen to it. The only reason they have sermons now, which they call homilies, they do it reluctantly, but they had to compete with Protestantism. This is America. So they started having sermons, but they wouldn't call it a sermon. So they call it a homily, and it's shorter and small. They're there to dispense sacraments. So it doesn't matter if they have no personality whatsoever. It doesn't matter if you can relate to them or not. In fact, you can't, because they got 4,000 families per, right? They just give you the communion. But Joel Osteen, he's a Rebbe, right? You turn on the TV, you're inspired. That's a Rebbe. And if you look at southern Germany and you look at southern Poland on a map, they're right next to each other. And when did evangelical Christianity begin? In the 1700s. And when did Hasidism begin? In the 1700s. There are two versions of the same phenomenon.
Was the Baal Shem Tov and then his primary followers, were they aware that they were creating something that basically sounds like a scam? Or, I mean, to me, it sounds like a scam. You can go down the list of various people who said, yeah, support me, I'm charismatic, and I want to, take your money and have sex with your daughters, and or were they really truly believing that they were bringing people to God?
Almost from the very beginning, there was this question of authenticity versus scam. Almost from the very beginning. And in fact, we're going to look at that in our next text, how quickly it becomes a question of, are these guys authentic or are they scamming people? But one comment I was thinking about all day that I wanted to share with all of you is a common misunderstanding that well-to-do people like us have about charismatic churches, because we're all sure that the followers are being ripped off by the leader because they're enriching the leader and they're all poor. And what I want you to understand, in my opinion, but I'm right, is that
Unless Sarah's.
Is that whether or not you approve of the way the charismatic leader is getting money from the followers are not being fooled. That's the point I wanted to share. They know exactly what they're buying. The people who send $20 into the TV preachers, for one thing, just like the synagogue is always upset that people are sending money to Chabad and that we can't get them to contribute, but Chabad is cheaper and easier. All right, it's the same thing with the church. They send $20 to Joel Osteen. They're not giving it to the local church. Okay, so they're getting cheap salvation. That's first of all. So it's a bargain. But secondly, they are getting an uplift that's worth it to them. And let me share with you an analogy. When I would go to the clergy fellowship, and not in places like Wyckoff, but in Huntington, West Virginia, and Scranton, Pennsylvania, where there were really different races and economic levels represented in the clergy fellowship. The Black minister always came wearing a $3,000 suit, always. And a lot of times it was a breakfast meeting, okay? But he's wearing a $3,000 suit. You might say, look how he's scamming his poor followers, right? None of them can afford a good suit, okay? They're lucky if they can afford a cheap suit. But if the whole church contributes, they can buy a $3,000 suit for their minister like the richest white people have. And he wears it everywhere. He represents them. Now, here's the question, are they real or are they scamming the people? Is he, I became a minister so that I can wear a $3,000 suit? I went to breakfast, I wore a sports shirt, okay? But he wears the suit because he's doing it for them. He can't not wear the suit. It makes his community proud. They can't all wear a $3,000 suit, but their minister wears it for all of them. He's uplifting them. He's uplifting them all. The Cadillac that the black minister of the poor church drives, he's driving it for all of them. They all feel uplifted when he drives it. Why shouldn't they get it? Right? So now you have the question of the inner life of the tzaddik, which is going to be the next text we look at. Is he doing this humbly for the sake of the people, or is he doing it because he likes wearing a fancy suit and driving a Cadillac? Obviously, there's going to be some of each, right? Because people are people. There's going to be some of each. Now, going back though to this text before we go into the next one, how is the Rav paid? This is Eastern Europe. It's Europe altogether. People didn't pay synagogue dues. How was the Rav paid? Taxes. The Jewish community had the authority to tax its own members. In places where they didn't, like in many of the German principalities, the government taxed the Jews, the religious head taxed, and gave the money back to the Jewish community to do with it as it wished. But religion in Europe was, and is to this day in most places, supported by taxes. Just because you have a democracy doesn't mean you have the First Amendment, okay? There's a Church of England, there's a Church of Sweden, right? There's an official church in every community in Europe. The Jews also had an official church. And tax money was collected either by the government or authorized by the heads of the Jewish community. And they hired the Rav, they hired the Rosh Yeshiva, they hired the Dayanim who sat in the court, they hired the Shoichet. All these rabbinic functionaries were hired through tax money. When the rabbi went to synagogue, he was not the rabbi of the synagogue because he was hired by a community. He sat by the Eastern Wall and set an example of devout worship. And usually he taught a Mishnah lesson after morning minyan. He was not the rabbi of the synagogue. Synagogues hired cantors to lead the worship if they were rich enough to afford it. But rebbes were not hired by a community, right? They were sent out by the Maggid, they came to town, and suddenly they're setting up a competing institution to all the other institutions of the community. Come be a follower of the Rebbe. So what were they supported by? The contributions of their followers. So that's why the Degel Machaneh Ephraim has to make this plea. You must donate money to support the Rebbe, because if he's free from earthly cares, then he's free to lift you up spiritually. Now, another, I guess you say, point or little lesson I'd like to teach. So, all right, you're a Chassid. You're reading this book. Oh, right. Sorry, I have to get back to definitions. I said that if you think that the word tzaddik is about a righteous person, you're going to be in for a big surprise. In the Bible, and historically ever after, according to the etymology of the word, tzaddik means a righteous person, and chassid means a pious person. They are often, as in the ashrei, used as parallel terms. Sometimes parallels are synonyms, and sometimes they're opposites that mean the same thing altogether. So like give ear, O heavens, and listen, O earth. Okay, heavens and earth are opposites, they're also the same thing, right? Together they're the universe. So tzaddik and hasid are together the servants of God. A tzaddik is a righteous person and therefore someone who serves God through caring about fellow human beings. A hasid is a pious person and therefore someone who serves God by loving God. But you're supposed to love God and serve human beings. So in a sense, tzaddik and hasid are the two aspects of divine service. Now in Hasidism, and not until Hasidism, and only in Hasidism, these terms have formal meanings. Tzaddik means the leader of a Hasidic community, and Hasid means a follower in a Hasidic community. So they no longer mean righteous person and pious person, they mean leader and follower. I translate the word tzaddik as politician.
So, and maybe I'm not having a brain part getting it wrong, but is it not true that when at a bris and the bris is performed, you can't perform the bris for yourself? And the person who holds the baby is a son, right?
It's the other way around. You're obligated to perform it yourself, but you don't have the skill, so you therefore appoint the mohel as your personal emissary. No, no,
Son, thank you.
the son, unrelated, the son. Tzaddik is a Yiddish word. It's a Yiddish word. Usually, yeah, Tzaddik is often translated as godfather, but it's not, because in Christianity, godparents have a lifelong obligation to the child. And in Judaism, Tzaddik is simply an honor given usually to a grandpa, better be. It's an honor only as long as the bris is actually taking place. You're not a lifelong Tzaddik, okay? So, right, but no, but the Tzaddik now is a formal title for the leader of the community. Now that we've gotten past the definitions, the point I was going to go on to was, all right, so how do you feel about it? You're being told you're a limb of the body, and that Tzaddik will do all the thinking, and you'll be the hands, you'll be the feet, maybe you'll be the wallet of the community, okay? Because you're all different parts. Maybe you'll be a rib. So how do you feel about this? You feel good. Hasidim were drawn from the Jewish lower classes. The upper classes were not attracted to it. They didn't want to be a follower. They were drawn from the uneducated. That's why the language of Hasidic communication, what was the language of Hasidic communication? Yiddish. There were only two Jewish movements in Eastern Europe that used Yiddish as their language of communication: socialists and the Hasidim. Workman's circle, right. Workman's circle, you know that, right? And why did they use Yiddish? Because they were speaking to the lower classes whose Hebrew wasn't very good. And how did they feel about let's say, the two great movements in Judaism, Talmud study and Kabbalah? They felt left out. Why do working class Americans vote for the Republicans when it goes against their economic interests? Because they feel left out by the intellectual elites of the Democratic Party. This has been talked about endlessly. I don't know what to do about it. I don't want to get into politics, but we know, whether you're Republican or Democrat, that there's some fact there. So the Jewish working class felt left out. They couldn't study Talmud. They didn't have the education to do it. It's a myth that every Jew was a Talmud scholar. That was only true in Vilna. And Kabbalah, everybody, just like now, everybody wants to be a spiritual person. Everybody wants Kabbalah. Everybody wants it. But one thing that a lot of modern day Jews don't understand, Kabbalah was not intended for everyone. In fact, it was intended for almost no one. The original concept of Kabbalah in Spain, and this remained even more of a concept of Kabbalah after the teachings of Isaac Luria in Safat, is not that if all the Jews will do this, the Messiah will come. The concept was, if 30 or 40 Jewish spiritual adepts will do the mitzvot with the right Kabbalistic intention, the Messiah will come. That was always the ideal of Kabbalah. Not that everybody's going to be doing this, just that the small number of spiritual masters will do it, and that will save the world.
And Madonna.
What?
And Madonna.
And Madonna. Well, but see, that's the point. Everybody wanted a piece of the action. Everybody wanted to be a Kabbalist, but they weren't allowed.
But they used to say under 45 to study the Kabbalah or something.
40. All right. The rule is you had to be 40 years old, married, because it's so sexual. And the sexuality has to be expressed somewhere. So you need to have a wife or you're going to be screwing everybody. Pardon me. So you have to be 40, married, and highly learned in the exoteric literature of Judaism. You have to be a Talmud scholar to keep you grounded. If you don't fulfill these three things, you can't. All right, but Isaac Luria, the greatest Kabbalist of all time, was 30 when he died. All right, so obviously nobody was following these rules, right? Where did Isaac Luria learn Zohar? He studied it in his yeshiva in Egypt before he came up when he was a teenager. And this is what happened. Teenage boys were sneaking peeks at the Zohar, right? Everybody wanted to be a Kabbalist, but you can't do it. It's too hard to get. Then they won't let you. And even if you try, you're not going to get it. If you can't learn Talmud, you're not going to learn Zohar either. Very difficult. I read the entire Daniel Matt translation of the Zohar word for word from beginning to end with all the commentaries. When I finished it, I said to my daughter, Shoshana, all right, can I call myself a Kabbalist now? And she said, pfft. And two of her best girlfriends have PhDs in Kabbalah from Hebrew University. They're not Kabbalists either, okay? I think they are. Anyway, so everybody wants to be a Kabbalist, nobody's allowed. Hasidism, the Tzaddik is a Kabbalist. And you can participate in the Kabbalistic endeavor of bringing Mashiach by supporting the Tzaddik and following his lead and example. So you're all getting drunk and dancing on Saturday night at Havdalah, which was a big time for getting drunk and dancing. Okay, and the fervor, you're full of, you're not doing it just, I mean, you can go to the tavern and get drunk, but you're not doing it. You're doing it in the Hasidic gathering. And your fervor is feeding the energy of the Rebbe, and he's feeding your energy. And if everybody succeeds, the Rebbe is going to bring the Messiah. If you help him by being the hands, the feet, the ribs, the hips, if you help by being the body. So that is one way in which this idea of having the head is very attractive to the working class Jew, that I can participate in the Kabbalistic endeavor of bringing Mashiach by being supportive of the Rebbe, who is a spiritual master, who is one of the 30 or 40 people in the world who can really do it, bring Mashiach. Okay, so it's an inclusivity. People don't feel put down or let down because they're just the fingernail or the toe, whereas the Rebbe's the head. No, it makes them a part of something they were otherwise excluded from. And the other thing that makes it attractive is that it's an image of a community as a single human body, which is a concept you already find in the Kabbalah. Some of you who studied a little Kabbalah are aware of the idea of Adam Rishon and Adam Kadmon, that the whole universe is, in a sense, a big human body. And on the next level, like Adam contained within his person the soul of every human being who would ever be born. So there's like a collective of humankind within a human. The human body represents the collective of humankind. And the Hasidic community now is expressing that on a social level. That not only is your person a miniature universe, as it is according to the Zohar, because all 10 divine emanations exist in your person, but the Hasidic community is a single body with a head and arms and legs and ribs and the whole thing. And if you participate, you donate to maintain and support the Rebbe so that he can be the head, you're part of that body. It's a beautiful image of community. And that's one of the big attractions of Hasidism, is that sense of community. Everybody wants to be part of a community.
Jump in for 1 second, if you don't mind, simply for the people who are like last night, just to sort of tie that in, to be clear, because Rabbi Wylen was saying exactly matches up with what I was saying, and when we talked about understanding the four, from a Kabbalistic point of view, the four letters of God, name, upper U, upper K, and above, and eliminate the idea that the lower A, which is in Kabbalah, which not got a feminine presence, and it also has a connection with the Israel. the Jewish people, so that sort of we, in our ideal state, get elevated to be part of the lowest aspect of God, but to be able to help complete that sense of unity and connection. So I just want to sort of make that connection. That's an idea that we'll get into.
Thank you, Rabbi. So let's go on. We're going to do this in chronological order rather than page order. So go to the last page. And I have some discussions here of the Tzaddik from the Noam Elimelech, which are words written by Rabbi Elimelech of Lizensk. Now, one of the favorite Hasidic characters in Hasidic tales, and a lot of you have read Hasidic tales or you've heard them from your rabbi in sermons, so you've heard the name of Rabbi Zusha. One of the most famous sayings, when I die and go to heaven, they're not going to ask me, why weren't you Moses? Why weren't you Isaiah? They're going to ask me, why weren't you Zusha? And that's the question that I tremble about. Maybe you've heard stories about Rabbi Zusha. No, that's,
Used to talk to Congo, one of the rabbis had a beautiful white nose referred to her. I don't remember.
that's not Zusha. Anyway, a lot of the stories about Zusha and his brother Elimelech are stories about their younger days before they became followers of the Magi, before Hasidism had become a movement, when they were peripatetics. It was common amongst young Jews in those days, because we didn't have monasticism, who wanted to live a sort of a monastic kind of life, to become peripatetics, to be propertyless, and spend a couple of years of your teenage life wandering from town to town to town, living on contributions from people, stopping in at the base medrash, the study house, wherever you went, and learning a little Talmud and Torah for whoever's learning there, and then going on to the next town. So they were both peripatetics. And all the stories about the fact that Zusha was a shlemazel and Elimelech was not. Bad things were always happening to Zusha, and they didn't happen to Elimelech. Well, then the two of them became disciples of the Maggid. Okay, they went to where in Bezerich, where he was training people, and they were sent out to be this first generation of Rebbes. Zusha remained impoverished his entire life. And by the way, bad things did keep happening to him. And if his followers gave him a penny, he immediately gave it away as tzedakah. He couldn't bear the thought of having money. So he was always dressed in rags and couldn't pay the bills his entire life, even though he was a famous Rebbe. His brother Elimelech went exactly the opposite direction. He was the first of all the Hasidic Rebbes to establish a royal court. He had a palace built. And when he traveled in a closed carriage pulled by 6 white horses. And he hired an orchestra. He had a full set of musicians in his court so that when they were doing their Hasidic dancing and singing and everything, they had a band, they had a house band. Now, they're in Poland, the Polish kingdom is in southern Poland, in Galicia. Who else traveled around in a carriage pulled by 6 white horses? Polish noblemen. Polish noblemen. The squire. What's the Polish word for nobleman? Starts with P. I'm blanking on it. I can't think of it. The pan. The pan. I think. But whatever. Anyway, the nobility. So did Jews have nobles? No, we were just Jews. But imagine the pride of the Hasidim. We're not Gentiles, but we also have someone who rides around in a carriage pulled by 6 white horses. Like that black church with the $3,000 suit, it gave those Hasidim great pride. They did not object to Elimelech living in this incredibly enriched manner. But of course, if you asked him, what would he say? It means nothing to me. It's for the sake of them, right? That's of course what he would answer. Is it true? I don't know. I'm not his psychotherapist. Maybe for him it was true, but obviously it enables abuse.
Look at the glamour of the Vatican. And I would say most popes would say.
There's an old Yiddish saying, which I don't know a word of Yiddish. I'm fifth generation American. I only know it in English translation. The old Yiddish saying is, everybody loves a rich person because it shows the splendor of which a human being is capable. So they loved enriching their Rebbe, and Eli Melech established the system that of the royal court, where the Rebbe has a location, and the followers either live in the area, or some of them attracted thousands of followers from all over. They would mail in their contributions, and they would make a pilgrimage to the Rebbe. Interestingly, which holiday was the #1 holiday for making pilgrimage to the Rebbe? Surprising. Shavuot. I know, such a minor holiday. But maybe they wanted to make it major because it was minor. And also the roads are good at that time of year. Remember, you're in Eastern Europe, you're on paved roads. It's not too cold. Mud season has ended, but on Shavuot. And what was the #1 food gift they would bring to the Rebbe's court?
Dairy.
Dairy. Right, they bring a wheel of cheese
Why?
because it's customary to eat dairy for Shavuot. Now, I'm going to make a little aside, although it has nothing to do with the Rebbe, it's just cute. So, Noam Elimelech of Lizensk never wrote a book in his life. Many charismatic leaders don't write, right? Did Jesus write anything? No, Paul wrote it. You know, did the Baal Shem Tov write anything? No, Jacob Joseph wrote it. Elimelech never wrote a word, but after he died, his disciples found thousands of scraps of paper in his desk, and they gathered them together, transcribed them, and published them in a book called the Noam Elimelech. And in the Hasidic world today, if a girl wants to get married and she hasn't found the right groom, if you put a copy of the Noam Elimelech under your pillow, God will send you a groom. That's one of the primary uses of the Noam Elimelech today. Does it actually work? I don't know, but when my daughters in Israel were single, I gave them my copy and said, please use this.
Did they get married?
What?
Did they get married?
They did. I don't know if it's because of the Noam. Actually, there was a famous matchmaker in Jerusalem who made marriages for a number of the friends of my daughter Shoshi, and he was dying to fix her up too, but she declined. She's too American. She wanted to find her own. Why did she like Reuben above all other boys? Because he was a shepherd. Literally. I know, she couldn't, a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant? No, a shepherd. He wasn't permanently a shepherd, but he'd been a shepherd. She found that very attractive. She was looking for a shepherd. When she was a teenager, she had a crush on a guy who'd been a shepherd. So anyway, the Noam Elimelech, I gave it away anyway because I found it unreadable. I mean, remember, it's not a continuous. It wasn't even written by the author. It's just all these, little notes. So you can find little gems in there, but if you don't have the strength to wade through it for the gems, it's hard reading. So these are some of the gems. So the Tzaddik's sin. Are you with me? It's on the very last page. This is from Joseph Dan's little anthology of Hasidic writings. A tzaddik must establish communion with the people he wants to help if he is to influence them and draw down divine emanation for them. You see, it's all about relationships. Because he's a charismatic leader, right? You don't go to him for his knowledge. So there has to be communion. Anyone who wants to help a friend cannot do so properly unless he is communion with his friend. You know this, right? You have to be a friend before you can help a friend. Similarly, to help the people of Israel, a tzaddik must establish communion with them. So here is a real distinction between the scammer and the true tzaddik. The true tzaddik cares about his people, cares about his chassidim. If you saw the movie or read the book, The Chosen, you know about that. Right? You can't be hard-hearted and be a Rebbe. You have to feel the pain of the people. How should a tzaddik behave with people who are, heaven forbid, sinful? In other words, everybody. Okay, he's a high and holy person. That's why he's the Rebbe. How can he remain high and holy if he's now the leader of a community of everybody else, the sinners, the ordinary people? Well, even a wicked person cannot live without divine emanation. In other words, there's a little spark of holiness in everyone. But how can a tzaddik establish communion with the wicked person? In other words, how can the person who is totally holy, who's all spark, connect to this little spark of holiness in the ordinary person who's mostly not holy? The answer is found in the Talmudic passage that says, "Great is the sin which is committed for the sake of heaven." The tzaddik too must commit a sin, but it is a sin for the sake of heaven. In other words, it is a sin. It is a sin for the Rebbe to have a relationship with his community. It is a sin. But it's permissible because he's only doing it to lift them up. This is called descent for the sake of ascent. And it's a concept that existed in Kabbalah before Hasidism. But they are, frankly, making it a better descent. The concept of descent for the sake of ascent, which you find in Isaac Luria, became a very fallen doctrine, especially in the hands of Shabbatai Tzvi, the false messiah. They made it into, we have to, as long as our intention is holy, we have to do as much sin as possible in order to use up the sin of the world, and then the Messiah will come. So they had sacred orgies to use up the sins, but they weren't doing it because they were, sexually interested. They were just doing it to use up the sin to bring the Messiah. And when Shabbatai Tzvi, was exposed as a false Messiah in 1666, it was devastating to the Jews of Europe, which, by the way, was more than half, who had become his followers and believed he was the Messiah. The Hasidic movement was specifically a response to the Shabbatai Tzvi movement. Specifically a response. They're going to take these fallen ideas and these devastated people and put them back together again and uplift them all. So the idea of descent for the sake of ascent becomes, in Hasidism, only one person can do it, not everyone. The only person who can descend for the sake of ascent is the Rebbe, because he can be trusted to do it for holy purpose. And he's not having sacred orgies, he's just entering the world of material concerns and all, so that he can take everybody and lift them all back up towards heaven, find the holy sparks and lift them up.
You have to be understanding every person.
Would you lower your mask so I can hear you?
If the idea is how can he understand the average person if he's never had that experience? How can he understand the sinner if he's never committed a sin? Is that?
No, he's not a sinner himself. He descends into the world of sin. He understands it because he's empathetic, not because he too has sinned.
No.
He's entering the world of sinfulness. He's not doing it by becoming a sinner.
What it's like to commit a sin, so that.
No. He's too pure for that. He's defended by his purity so he can enter the world of sinfulness and not be one of them. He's allowed to interact. He's allowed to interact with.
Sin is the act of engaging with people.
That.
Right.
You have to think about the lens of the famous story about the prince who thinks he's a rooster.
Yes.
Everybody's trying to convince him he's not a rooster, and finally the Rebbe gets under the table with him, and they're roosters together.
Right. He doesn't sin. This is not Shabbatianism, okay? Please, thanks for being here. He enters the world of sinners. Now, here's where I'm going to make a comparison to the Lubavitcher movement. Been waiting to do this. You've learned enough about the Tzaddik now from Rabbi Moshe Chaim Ephraim and from Elimelech of Zazensk to perceive that What the Lubavitcher Rebbe did in creating his Shaliach movement starting in the 1960s was trying to do in America exactly what the Maggid of Mezerich was doing in the Ukraine in the late 1700s. Which is to say, send out a Rebbe, a Tzaddik, to every community trained by the chief to establish communities everywhere. Of course, he didn't dare call them Rebbe or Tzaddik, you know. He called them Shaliach, which is still what they're called. They're emissaries. But the Lubavitcher Shaliach is an exact replica of what the Maggid was doing in sending his disciples out. Oh, except, of course, America is not Poland. There's the difference. You know, the followers of the Shaliachs of the Lubavitcher movement are not expected to become Hasidim. They're expected to become financial supporters. But the one thing you must realize is that they are friendly towards you. They are not your friend. Because you are the world of the sinfulness. They have descended into your world. They're like an angel pretending to be a human being living amongst human beings. Inside, do they love you? As a theological stance, they love you. Because you have that spark in you. But they also have contempt for you. Because you are the world of sinfulness that they have descended into in order to save the spark within you. So when they're talking to you, they're not really relating to you. And I'll tell you why they're not. Because if there was any chance that they could actually be your friend, they wouldn't be sent as the Shaliach. Because they have to maintain their separateness. Because it's descent for the sake of ascent. They can't lift you up into their world of holiness if they become one of you. That would be just plain sin. It's, as Elimelech of Lizenz describes here, descent for the sake of ascent, only to lift you up. So you are, in a sense, an object, not a subject for them. To redeem your holy spark and bring it back. Now, because they're human beings, sometimes they descend and stay there. And the most famous case of that is Shlomo Carlebach, who remained devoted to the Rebbe, but did not remain to Lubavitcher, right? He was sent by the Rebbe, because he had musical talent, to Haight-Ashbury, to redeem the hippies. When the Rebbe found out that half the hippies in Haight-Ashbury were Jewish, he sent Shlomo Carlebach to redeem them. And what happened? Shlomo Carlebach became one of them. He became a hippie. So he descended and stayed there. Although he became, in a sense, his own Rebbe, right? People followed him. He became his own Rebbe. He was personally always devoted. He never repudiated the Lubavitcher Rebbe, but he did not stay within the movement. He became a hippie. He entered that other world, but he was a Rebbe in his own. And by the way, he also did a lot of that other kind of descent also, okay? So is that kind of charismatic leadership particularly subject to that sort of abuse? Yes. He loved the souls of people so much, and particularly beautiful women, that he lifted them up towards a holier level in every way that he could think of, okay? He did love to hug everyone, male and female, but he hugged the women a little more tightly. But that doesn't mean he was insincere. He was not insincere. He wasn't in it for that. He was absolutely sincere in what he was doing. And his daughter, Dari, who's not the one who inherited the franchise, the one who inherited the franchise is Nechama. But Dari, who was the daughter by a different wife, happens to be a good friend of my daughter's in Israel. And she just wrote on her Facebook page a beautiful, beautiful memoir of her father. And the effect that he had on people and the care that he had for people. Worth looking at. So just go on Facebook and look up Dari Karlbach, and you'll find what she wrote about her dad. Gorgeous. So he was a Rebbe. He became a Rebbe in his own right. He was a breakaway. And he sort of stepped outside the movement, but he was doing a similar thing to lift up the people. So descent into the world of sinfulness. There's Hasidic language for all this, which is sparks and shells. There's the material world is the world of the klipa, the shell, like a nut inside a shell. And the nut is the holy spark that exists within each Jew. Did they think it existed in non-Jews? No, they did not. Although obviously the Vedanta form of Kabbalah extended it to all humankind. There were, by the way, from the very beginning, the Christian world was also attracted to Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is such a beautiful teaching that everybody wants it. So there's also a Christian Kabbalah. And there's also a Jewish Kabbalah, which did not extend only as far as Jews, but extended out to the non-Jewish world as well. And that is represented by the Berg movement, the Kabbalah.com, Kabbalah Incorporated, whatever you want to call it, right? And while I don't approve of their magical practices or their fundraising techniques, but they are not insincere in what they're doing. And Rabbi Berg wrote a book on the Zohar, which he mailed to every rabbi in America, seeking some legitimacy for himself. And I read the book, and I have to say he knew what he was talking about. Right? He was not a phony. By the way, what do you call a misnagid, someone who's opposed to the Hasidic movement? Someone who says that when the Baal Shem Tov was feigning ignorance in order to better to relate to the general public, he wasn't feigning.
Does sincerity make anything okay? Or everything okay?
If the Rebbe really cares about the people, if the people understand exactly what they're getting when they give him money, then it might not be our preferred way of doing things, and the IRS hates it. They hate evangelical religion of all kinds because gets around the taxes, right? Reverend, you have 3 Cadillacs. Oh, no, I don't have any. Those belong to the church. Reverend, you live in a mansion. Oh, no, that's the church. I'm a poor person, right? The IRS hates it. But, who's harmed? Now, when it becomes a scam, and it easily does, and by the 5th generation of Hasidism, many of the Rebbe's were scams. And that's where, why am I blanking on his name? The Pinsk Rebbe. Not Pinsk, though. Anyway, there was a Rebbe came along in the 5th generation and said, all these scams are a disgrace. We have to bring Hasidism back to its original, spiritual message. And if you read the Hasidic literature, he succeeded in doing so. I would say he didn't, that the scams remain. But again, not everybody was a scam. There's lots of sincere.
Well, but I'd say Jesse James has been sincere too, but anyway, that's another conversation.
Does the scam, in a sense, still exist in certain areas that we know, Muncie and so forth, where every home there's 10 children and
Oh, scamming the non-Jewish world is a completely different matter. They were always doing that.
this is the Hasidic
Yes,
that is doing that.
yes, scamming the non-Jewish world, because that's totally the world of the evil shell. There's no holy spark there. So scamming them, they consider to be a mitzvah.
That's a mitzvah.
Yes, they have zero ethics as far as the non-Jewish world.
And how about towards Jews that are not of their, that are not Hasidic?
No, because you have a holy spark. You're a sinner. See, the non-Jewish world can't even be sinners. It's not even a world of humans. This is why I cannot be one of those myself. When you're giving them money, you're giving them to people who believe that non-Jews are animals in human form. I find that unacceptable myself, so I would never give them a penny. Also, the treatment of women. But to them, yeah, but see, I'm sympathetic with the original rationale for scamming the non-Jewish world, which is they were under the czar.
That's.
The more you could scam the czar, the better. But to do that in America, I think is really morally problematic. But they still think they're living in the world of the czar. They have not, remember, they only came to America because they had nowhere to go after the Holocaust. They didn't come to buy into the American dream, and they have not, and they do not. Okay?
Basically.
I happen to know that a local Lubavitcher leader, the most renowned local Lubavitcher leader, took a woman who had converted to Judaism by me. And when she joined his shul, I was surprised he let her, because why would he recognize my conversions as valid? He wouldn't. But I found out why. She was an elderly person, and when she became mentally incompetent, he got some Chabad lawyers to write her $400,000 case of money, what do you call it, over to him. And when she died, the relatives were shocked to find out that they did not earn anything from their rich aunt, and they called me. And to ask what was going on here. They called me to advise them what's going on here. We never heard of this guy, and suddenly has all of our aunt's money.
Called an improvident gift.
And they went to a lawyer. After all, what he did was criminal. And the lawyer and this Rebbe was not impressed. He said, "You go ahead. You have to pay your lawyer. I have hundreds of lawyers who will work for me for free. You go ahead and try to sue me." So the family had no resources. They were stuck. And I wrote this Rebbe a personal letter. I said, "I know what you did, and you know what you did. Would you give 10% of the money to nephew X as a college fund? Just give him 10%. Nah, he stole it. He's keeping it." Now, how do I know that he didn't consider this woman to actually be a Jew? Because after he got her hand to sign all the money over, he put her in a nursing home and never visited. Now, if he thought she was a Jew, he would have visited.
So she wasn't a Jew because the conversion he didn't.
Right. So does it lend itself to, right? And I know he gets money thrown at him from many people in this synagogue, in my former congregation, and when people throw money at him because he's a holy man. So yes, it lends itself to scam. What?
This is a Lubavitcher rabbi in our community.
Yes.
I just trying to go from the other side of this, where the father should grab my best and again, they don't have much, 40, 50 minutes, so you go to the whole school over in town.
Yeah, look, when I needed a light bulb, I used to go to, this was before I was a member here, or I would have gone to Wayne Electric, who's owned by one of our members. But I was in Wayne, so I went to the place down on 23 South. And they knew who I was, Rabbi Wylen. I buy a light bulb. They charged me the light bulb. That's $23, Rabbi. I pay it. I happen to know that they donated the entire electrical system of the Chabad house in Wayne. They donated it. They were asked and they donated it. But they charged me for my light bulb. I thought, you can donate me a light bulb. I'm a rabbi. Right. But I'm not a Rebbe.
They will not charge you dues, but if you want to buy movie tickets, it's $25.
Now, interestingly, my favorite Hasidic Rebbe, my favorite Hasidic Rebbe, Levi Yitzhak Berdichev, was unusual because he was the Rebbe and the Rav of Berdichev. He was an incredibly learned scholar, and he was appointed Rav and Rebbe. So he was the leader of both the Hasidim and the anti-Hasidim in Berdichev. Not surprisingly, he got fired 2 or 3 times in his first year there, but they never quite kicked him out. And then eventually people were drawn to his personal holiness. They were drawn to him, and so they stopped trying to fire him and he became very famous. Yeah. The Maggid of Mezerich, by the way, was also fired from his first 3 positions. And that was always my ideal. If you haven't been fired at least 3 times, You're not a Rebbe. Now, talking about sincerity and insincerity, the Noam Elimelech himself, the first royal type Rebbe, he talks about that. The problem of how do you know that the Rebbe's cares about the people is not just in it for the money. He says a great Tzaddik who has been righteous for a very long time and continually goes strong in his righteousness is not threatened by pride, even though he has many notable achievements to his credit. The greater he is, he doesn't even notice, doesn't care. On the contrary, he is still able to see his own defects and grieves because his worship is incomplete. Further, his very efforts to help the people of Israel cause him pain, for deep within himself, he feels the bitter suffering of their life in exile, the heavy taxation and so forth. Yeah, Jews were taxed very heavily in the Austro-Hungarian Empire and in the Tsarist Empire, the realm of Hasidism. So a real Rebbe, yes, he's living in a royal palace. He's pulled by a carriage with 6 white horses, but he's suffering all the time because he feels the pain of his people. And if he's a real Rebbe, this is true. This is how he will be. And because he was concerned about the people of Israel, the enthusiastic joy he feels during worship and communion seems like nothing to him. The Hasidim were very big on serving God through joy, right? You're miserable already. Don't serve God by being more miserable. Serve God by being joyous. Tzaddikim like this are the pillars of the world of Israel. Even when they're dancing and singing with the Hasidim, their heart is full of pain because they feel the suffering. When any one of their Hasidim suffers, they feel the suffering. But tzaddikim who are newcomers, who are just beginning their worship, they become enthusiastic and proud when they accomplish something holy and imagine that they have already arrived at the peak of true worship. Though they are tzaddikim, nonetheless, they are guilty of the sin of pride. In other words, the ones who enjoy their position of leadership, there's something wrong there. Not that they're not a tzaddik, but they're not the best tzaddik. They're not the most complete tzaddik. When you're a real tzaddik, you'll have all these things, but they will mean nothing to you because you're so busy just caring about your people. And that is the beautiful ideal, right? That the people have put you on this pedestal, but you don't even notice a pedestal. You're saying, oh, if only I could be a better human being, right? You're still full of humility. Now, is this possible? One of my goals when I was much younger was to be world famous for being an extremely humble rabbi. And I thought that was kind of a little joke to myself, but you know who's accomplished that? Pope Francis. When Pope Francis came to New York, I was driving up the Garden State Parkway that day from Philadelphia. It took me 3 hours to get home because of all the traffic on the Garden State Parkway, because he was in Manhattan or Brooklyn. And when the Pope found out that his presence had caused a traffic jam in the greater New York area, he said, what? Me? I feel bad about that. I apologize to all the people who got stuck in traffic because I visited New York. And he meant, you know, he was mortified that people were stuck in a traffic jam. The people were inconvenienced because of his presence. That's just natural self. And another person, I'd like to give more Jewish examples, but these are just from my personal experience. I taught for many years at the University of Scranton. The president of the University of Scranton at the time was Father Pranuska. It's a Jesuit university. He was a Jesuit. At the time I was there, a Jewish donor gave to the University of Scranton $60 million, which at the time was the largest donation ever given to any college in all of history. I think since then, someone gave more money to Yale or Harvard or something. It was the largest donation ever given by Harry, what's his name, who grew up in Scranton, but owned the Baltimore public transit system. Do you know what I'm talking about? I can't remember anyway, but he grew up poor. They gave him a scholarship at University of Scranton. So he donated $60 million to a Jesuit college. But Father Pranuska, when I was at receptions here and there, because they were very proud to have a rabbi on the faculty, and I was one of, so you know, I wasn't just another faculty member. I was also like the rabbi of Scranton. So I got to go to all these receptions, and Father Pranuska would be there, and you might be like pushing past someone to get to the hors d'oeuvres, you know, in the Jewish fashion. And then you suddenly realize you just shoved Father Pranuska aside, you know, and he's the president of the whole university. And he's so humble that you didn't even notice he was there. Couldn't help it. It's not like you didn't notice him because he was such a schlemiel, you know? No, you didn't notice him because he was so humble, he just could not establish presence. But he was able to raise $60 million contributions and have one of the college that was rated every year by Forbes, the best bargain in the college education in America, the best for your money. So it's possible to be a very humble, extremely holy, highly accomplished person with lots and lots of followers. But not everyone can reach that level, right? It's pretty rare. So as Rabbi Elimelech says, of course, he would claim to be one of the former type, right? The ones that doesn't mean anything to me. I'm just busy caring for my Hasidim, and it may be true, may indeed be true. I'm willing to grant him complete sincerity. But there are obviously tzaddikim who love having the carriage and the palace and all of that. And he doesn't say they're not tzaddikim, right? They are tzaddikim. You can be their followers. You're still a Hasid. They're just not the best tzaddikim. Pinchas of Koretz, that's the Rebbe who tried to revive Hasidism in the 5th generation and get rid of all the scams. Pinchas of Koretz, he said, we got to get back to the original vision of Hasidism. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. What time is it? All right, it's almost 2, so we should probably not read more text unless you want to read one more text, but I think we've
That's a lot of food for thought.
a lot of food for thought. All right, I will tell you what's in the other texts, and you can read them on your own if you want, or you can return the sheet to me if you're not just for today, or you can keep it and put it in your files, whatever you want, it's yours. There are 3 people in the Torah who are called Tzaddik. Who are the 3 people in the Torah who are called Tzaddik? One is obvious. No, interestingly enough. Of all the titles he's given, they never say Moses the Tzaddik. That would be the best guess, but no. Abraham. Abraham is what? Abraham. Noah. Even though he's not Jewish, it's called Tzaddik. Tzaddik b'dorotav. He was the righteous of his generation. That's why he was pointed to. And the third one, which you would know more about this, especially in Kabbalah. Which of the biblical characters symbolizes the 9th divine emanation Yesod, which is called Tzaddik? Joseph. Joseph. Joseph is the husband, as it were, of the Shekhinah. Why? Because we know from the Joseph story that he demonstrated proper restraint in the presence of Potiphar's wife. And also because he is called Tzaddik in the Torah, and his, let's say, the way he treated his brothers and everything he did for Egypt, all of this is Tzaddik. Right? So Joseph, Abraham, and Noah are called Tzaddik. And in Kabbalah, Joseph is the symbol of the Tzaddik. Now that means a righteous person. But once Tzaddik in Hasidism comes to mean the leader of the community, they're naturally going to look at Noah, Abraham, and Joseph as symbols of the Tzaddik, the Hasidic leader. And what you have in the other commentaries that we haven't looked at today is examples from 2 of the great Hasidic writers who did, unlike Elimelech, actually wrote down their commentaries, from the Gerer Rebbe and from my hero, Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev, in which they take the biblical stories of Noah, Abraham, and Joseph and comment on them in a way to talk about what the Hasidic tzaddik, Hasidic leader should really be. So if you study those on your own, that's what you're looking at. Thank you for coming today. Thank you, participants.
Rabbi Wylen. Fascinating presentation. Thank you for all your learned knowledge and imparting some of it to us.
Pleasure, pleasure.
And
We had to be part of this community.
and we hope to have you speak again on such a.
Absolutely. It doesn't only have to be once a year either. You know, I'm a member and I want, hello, take care.
Thank you.
You are so lucky to have this woman running our
We know.
preschool.
No,
She is the greatest.
she did a presentation too for luncheon there.
Did she?
Yeah, on children's.
Very COVID, it was very sparsely attended.
No, but. Thank you. How do you bring the water of this?
modern customs today. You gave us a lot of information that I,
Yes.
only because of my interaction.